Welcome back to the Game Room, you silly Billy. Today's episode of Pause Mode dives back into subset collecting angles for the non-PlayStation systems. This episode's focus concerns the Sega Saturn, and if I'm being honest, writing a subset video for the deck is a weird journey through unrealized potential and insanely limited options. With the Saturn's American life being cut short as fast as it was, there really wasn't time for publishers to develop deep library choices. For this episode, I decided to tackle one of the few series to have made it to at least 3 games in the library, as well as discuss the catch-22 and caveat they offer for gamers and collectors alike. Since you had to see the thumbnail to click through this episode, you know that series is Mortal Kombat. Midway and its partners had a depressingly rough time in the 32-bit era, and it didn't feel that anyone had a really good grasp of the available hardware. There were never any flawless ports of the available arcade games, and trying to expand the series into new genres only provided more fodder for jokes and angry game reviewers. The Saturn's own hardware didn't really help. Despite being a 2D-based system at heart, it was a beast to program for. With programmers possibly not familiar enough with the architecture and more than likely having short development windows, all these factors provided puzzling and in some cases heartbreaking results for arcade fans. First and most infamous of the 3 games we'll talk about today is Mortal Kombat 2. I originally talked about this way back in Pause Mode episode 10, and nothing's really changed since then. The game's music has been swapped out for lesser quality tunes, there are missing voice samples, weird color palette issues every so often, and the now legendary need for the games to load the special moves the first time you do them in round, rather than, say, at the loading screen. MK2 is a mere shell of its real self, and after going back to it again for this video, it still feels like an unrefined beta of an arcade game that deserves so much more. On a much brighter note, the second game to come out was Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3. Released as an unofficial exclusive title to the Sega Saturn since Sony had the exclusive rights to MK3, Ultimate MK3 became the high point of the series here on Sega's home field. A more reliable port of the arcade thanks to it being translated from the actual PlayStation MK3 code, Ultimate offers more characters, fatalities, and stages than the base MK3 did. There are visual hiccups, however, especially with all the transparencies being changed to checkerboard patterns. Ultimate MK3 has been one of the Saturn's staple purchases for both gamers and collectors, and over 20 years later still deserves a spot on the shelf with a caveat to be discussed later on. Finally, and probably most tragically, is Mortal Kombat Trilogy, everyone's favorite hot mess and guilty pleasure. That's not to say I don't love it. I did. I bought it day 1 for my PlayStation all those years back and playing it a ton until I traded it in. But nostalgia must step aside for present-day critical discussion, and MK Trilogy is one of those games that you can't look away from. At the time, rather than just release a 3-pack of games, Ed Boon decided to smash together as many assets as they could into one engine, creating Mortal Kombat Trilogy that was, essentially, not a trilogy. While the prospect of using damn near every character in MK history looked promising, in combining the assets more things got removed than added in, simply because the new content needed didn't exist and couldn't be bothered to be made. That meant that Johnny Cage no longer had his split punch with certain characters, Sub-Zero had his spine rip fatality go black since none of the MK3 characters had been given those animation frames. The Pit 2 stage had his fatality option completely removed since none of the MK1 or MK3 characters would have had the falling animation. They brought back some older versions of specific characters, but not others, and thanks to legal issues, my boy Johnny Cage got recast into a bro. Despite the larger roster and level selection, after a while MK Trilogy felt more mess than game. It also didn't help that the Saturn version came a year after the PlayStation release, giving it the vibe of a forgotten afterthought rather than a celebrated release. Only made worse by the Saturn version having transparency issues again and announcer voice clips being omitted. All of which brings us to the catch-22 moment and caveat I mentioned earlier. The concept of actually owning these 3 games. If you're a Mortal Kombat fan, you're going to buy them regardless. If you're a Sega Saturn collector not going for a full set, you'd be hard-pressed not to just snag Ultimate MK3 and call it a day. If you're going for a full set, then your wallet is going to take a severe brutality to it. Mortal Kombat 2 can go for between $30 to $50. Ultimate climbs slightly higher to $35 and $60, but it's MK Trilogy that has blown the door off the auction house, coming in at a whopping $100 to $150 average price point, which is hilarious considering you can buy the superior PlayStation version for an average $20. If you're looking for a more casual, less expensive experience and don't care what hardware you're playing on, the actual trilogy of MK1, 2, and Ultimate was released on a digital bundle for $10 on the PlayStation Store, Steam, and the Xbox Marketplace. The problem? After recording this original episode and going to work on the B-roll footage, I made some stupid discoveries that only adds to the Mortal Kombat curse. It turns out the Mortal Kombat Arcade Collection isn't on Steam anymore, or any PC distribution channel, since the game's coding was tied to Microsoft's Games for Windows platform, rendering it unplayable. Even more annoying is that the game is available on the PlayStation 3, but it's not represented on the store. No, really. If you try to search for the game or scroll through the entire 7,000 plus game library individually with all Sony platforms selected like I did, MK Collection does not show up on either the PC browser or the PS3 hub. It was only with the help of a friend who Googled and found the actual main page for the game that it finally appeared. I was able to buy it through the website and then go download it from the PlayStation 3's purchase history, but not before sitting through a system update, the game installation, and then the patch for it, because digital distribution. It's really available on 360. To add insult to injury, the PlayStation 2 and PlayStation 3 have compatibility issues with the PSX Mortal Kombat trilogy, so in order for you to truly enjoy Mortal Kombat as it was intended requires having the arcade collection on one system, and then the PlayStation 1 with the greatest hits edition of that game. For more on that stupid situation, check out episode 75 of Game Rave TV with the buggy MK trilogy. Mortal Kombat's livelihood in the 32-bit era is as tarnished as it was bloodstained. With the game spread too thin across multiple system exclusives and the only real original console version of Mortal Kombat 2 being the Super Nintendo version, it's a shame to see what else has to be done to try and play it 20 years later. And yes, there's MAME, but I've never gotten it to work, so there's that. In closing, this episode is all about collecting, and if you really need Mortal Kombat on the Saturn, honestly, just stick with Ultimate MK3. The full set folk and the die-hards fans will already have the full suite, but for the common gamer looking for a classic fix and wanting to take Sega's machine for a spin, we'll be fine with the middle choice. Otherwise, save yourself almost $200 on those other two games and treat yourself to something nice, like groceries for a month. That does it for Posmo, guys. Thank you so much for watching this episode. I'll see you back on the PlayStation side with Game Rave TV. Have a great week, and I'll meet you here next episode. Take care.